I am Declan and I'm here with Rob and Belinda. So I work for Hector's House. Rob and Belinda are responsible for establishing Hector's House. So before we get into the kind of question part of today's segment, could you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves as well?
Hello, I'm Belinda. I was Hector's mum. I live up in Wales at the moment. My poor husband has to commute every weekend. But it's all good, yeah.
I'm Rob Stringer, Hector's dad, and I have a day job where I'm a partner in a financial services firm, and also with Belinda, we co-founded Hector's House and the co-chairs of Hector's House. And I spend some of my week working with you guys and looking after people that reach out to us for support and defining what we do, along with amazing team at Hector's House, which is incredible. And as Belinda said, I come back to Wales in the weekend, which is, I just love being here, and not just for being with Belinda, but with the animals and with the big spaces. And yeah, it's wonderful. So one day I will retire and spend more time here.
Very nice. So obviously the reason that you guys are here and the reason the charity exists is that sadly Hector Stringer, who is your youngest son, took his own life when he was 18. The purpose of talking to you guys today isn't so much to talk about the obvious, very, very complex and difficult feelings that come with that. What we want to talk to you about today is the things that have come out of that, such as the charity, such as the support that I know you've given other people you've met just through your local communities and things like that, and to talk about the way in which you guys have managed to still find a life where you've got a future you can enjoy and a present you can enjoy, and how you've got yourselves into a position where you're, happy people leading a fulfilling life. So in order to do that, what I want to go back to first of all is when you lost Hector, aside from the emotional impact that comes with that loss, was there anything in particular that really caught you by surprise in beginning to deal with that and process that?
I think the actual love that people have for Hector, that caught me by surprise. The fact that I have never been hugged so many times or had the pleasure of looking after so many young people who were absolutely devastated by his death. It was shocking, but at the same time it was very, very heartwarming to feel that there was such a lot of love for him out there. They just came to the house for probably about 3 weeks, didn't they? There were people there all the time who we hugged, cared for, looked after, and in actual fact keep in touch with now. So it kind of was a shock, but in a way it wasn't a horrible shock. It was something that had to happen almost.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. And Rob, anything sort of from yourself?
So, it's really hard for me because I look through different lenses, through what happened to us at that time as a family, and then what I've learned subsequently. So the question was specifically what has taken me by surprise?
Yeah. So was there anything that was a real, other than just the loss, was there another thing that came alongside that, good or bad, which you would never have expected?
I think it is that contra thing that Belinda was saying, with Hector dying effectively out of the blue by suicide, meant that we had one set of people who then came and shared time with us and were so empathetic and so loving. And then at the same time, you had people who just didn't know how to cope with what had happened to us, and how to cope with it. So I often say this, that one of the reasons that Hector's House was born in terms of a sort of signposting page was I had people running away from us in the street who didn't want to speak to us, or people that came and told us all their problems, which then led to then saying, well, what do we do about that? The other again, it's a lens that I look at differently, but was that on that day, and which is one of the things that we'll work on in what's called post-vention or suicide prevention of people bereaved by suicide, is the fact that we were left absolutely without any reference to go to once Hector died. So we had no idea where to go from there. So it was left to us to contact people and let people know. And of course, knowing what I know now, what we try and do now in terms of that is, the shock of standing there going, well, what do we do now? What's the next step going forward? So that's been surprising. I think over time as well, something that shocks me tremendously is unending kindness of people, which is amazing that so much kindness is out there. And only the other day I was shocked, and I thought I'd process this when someone says, how many children do you have? And I think I've always thought I've been able to, that I do it. Yes, I have 3 children, and then hopefully one doesn't always need to go on in the place to actually explain that one of our children is not alive. But it came to me the other day when someone said it, and I said, and it was the situation where I didn't want to go into any of that, so I just said a different answer, which shocked me that even 11 years, coming up to 12 years after Hector's death, it's still hard. Absolutely. When someone asks you a sort of fairly normal question, is what you say next. So in terms of what shocked me, apart from everything else about that the day and then what we did afterwards, is that even recently, that simple question made me go, whoa, how am I going to answer this in this situation with this person who I didn't want to actually give my whole thing to,
life story to. Yeah.
And there are times when we do, and there are times when we share, and I think that's probably it's a protection thing as well. Even now that we still have to go, okay, what is this moment? What do I want to? What's happening right now that I need to feel and to deal with? And am I going to open up that whole thing right now,
or do I need to protect myself?
Yeah.
So because there are people that you find are almost overcome when you tell them. It can be quite shocking for them. You certainly find out who your friends are, and people who perhaps you never had time for before, who will suddenly come up to you and just be there for you. It's a very, very interesting thing that some people cope with it as this entity, and other people are totally unable to cope with it. They just disappear from your lives completely. And to this day, there are people who we have very, very little contact with now, who we would probably have regarded as friends before, because people just don't know what to say.
And also we're in a funny place, so I mean that could be partly down to us as well, partly down to them, or a bit of both. And then we have to look at that with compassion as well. So you're
very recent.
Yeah, but your whole life does change completely.
Yeah.
And you have to process that, and then look for hope and look for things so that you can eventually move forward.
I think we very quickly came to the conclusion that we didn't want Hector's life to have been this very short life that didn't really mean anything. We wanted it to mean something, and really that was the ethos of starting Hector's House. And for us, it's been a very cathartic thing, because we have been able to talk about it. We do talk about it. We're talking about it every day, all the time. People sometimes say, well, it must be worrying for you to talk about him. And I say, no, because actually I love talking about Hector. So it's actually cathartic for me to do that. So it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It's pretty interesting that you bring it up in that way, because I've several times just having conversations with Rob, whether they're sort of casually or in work mode, and he'll sometimes talk about Hector in a way that I'm still surprised how comfortable you are just talking about him. And I think that's because I'm projecting my perception of grief onto what your actual reality is. So, and I think it's people have this idea that because they think I don't know how I deal with that, so I don't know how you're going to deal with that, so I'm just not going to mention it and hope it doesn't come up, and that way we don't have to deal with it collectively. So I think it's an interesting thing to say that the way that people will be shocked at how comfortable you are talking about him, and not just talking about him, but talking about losing him as well. And I think it can be quite shocking at first, because I think you expect another person to be very guarded when they're talking about, I mean, any bereavement really, but I think there's a level of openness that you both have, which is very, very incredible. I think it demonstrates a lot of strength, and not just strength emotionally, but strength of character as well. It says a lot about who you are as people, and I think that's, from what I can see of it, I think that's who you've always been. I don't think that's something you've become because of anything else. I think you are just very open, warm, comfortable people. I think you've got...
Yeah, I think we are, because we when after Hector died, I felt that I didn't want to be that woman that everyone went, oh, you know her son died, and everybody avoids you, and you become this almost like a pariah.
Yeah.
And I didn't really want that. Hector's life was a joy, his whole life, I mean, he had his ups and downs and all that, and he was no saint, etc., but we were lucky enough to have experienced him.
Yes.
So for me, I'm blessed that I had that opportunity. So that's how I look at it. So that maybe helps me to stay on course and feel that I haven't lost out, but that I actually gained something.
Yeah. So not to be defined by your grief is an important thing.
That is actually, you've just taken the words that I was about to say, in that very early on, Belinda said that what has happened will not define us going forward. So Belinda, as Hector's mum, gave us permission to be able to move forward, to live a life, by saying that, because she was his mum. She gave birth to him. I mean, you can't do more than that as a woman. And so those are exactly the words that Belinda used, which often I check in with myself and go, okay, that's what we're going to do. And having said that, a few statements ago, I said that I was surprised recently where I decided not to actually keep a little bit of that to myself, just because in that particular situation I wanted to. But we hit suicide prevention and discussing suicide and what happened to Hector head on,
yeah.
That was Belinda's decision, that we won't, in our circumstances, it's very hard for other people. There was particular reasons why we know that it was suicide, and our view, and that isn't everyone's view, is that is what we will do, and that's how we will deal with it, rather than any other way that it could be seen to, in that sometimes when people die potentially by suicide or not, it may not be the verdict that a coroner comes to, and that's fine too, and that's fine for people, and not everyone can do what we've done in terms of saying this is how Hector died, and in that we want to then, where we can, and I believe that every suicide is preventable, prevent suicides going forward. But yeah, in terms of that definition, that was Belinda's. We will not be defined by this in the way that we can live our lives going forward. Sounds ridiculous because now we're running a suicide prevention charity.
We have been very much defined by it.
But I think what that meant is that we will find joy. We will still laugh. We will still go on. And there are times in our private times when we're, something comes on a piece of music, and I can end up in tears, and that's fine too. But we use it to push forward and to go forward. I think it's probably
I think
reasonable.
the difference is that you're using your grief to help you find a purpose, rather than allowing grief to be your purpose. I think those are two very, very different things. Like, one of them, you're using it almost like a fuel, and the other one is something that you're sort of smothered underneath. So I think there is a very big difference between those two things. As well, I meant to ask this right at the beginning, but the conversation started flowing. I didn't want to interrupt anything. So could you just give us, I know it's a very difficult thing to do, could you talk a little bit about Hector, and just to you both, individually and cooperatively, what is Hector? What was Hector to you? How would you define him, describe him? You know, what is it that you think of when you hear his name or see his picture? Because he was a very handsome man. There's that photograph right behind you that's like staring right at me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Hector was a very, very easy child. He was born easily. He came into this world just looking around saying, hey, I'm here. There was something very, very special about that, I think. And as he grew up, he was always he always had a lot of empathy for people, a lot of empathy for animals. He was very, very empathetic, wasn't he? Even as a little, 4 or 5 year old. He was very interested in music right from the little tot. In fact, he said he wanted to play the guitar, and I'd got a guitar, and I said, well, you play that for a year and I'll buy you one, which is what happened. And I bought him a guitar, and he just went for it, didn't he? And he taught himself a lot, although he had a teacher for a while, but she said he's learned everything I can teach him. I'm only a basic teacher, so she said, just carry on. So Hector was very, very much into his music, but he was also very sporty. He had the rugby club. He had a lot of friends, massive amounts of friends who are still on the scene. A lot of them, aren't they?
Different friends from different backgrounds,
a lot of different groups
interests.
Of friends. Yeah. Funnily enough, after Hector died, they all came together and
didn't know some of them.
Started to know each other and become this huge network of people who had been friends with Hector. But he had just this natural empathy. He always had it, and he would feel sorry for people. He would feel, if something happened to somebody, he would really feel sorry for them. Whereas I'd sort of, oh, for God's sake, they should pull themselves together or something like that. He'd go, oh no, Mum, but think about it. And really, at a very young age, he had that ability.
And there was a dog tied up on a chair somewhere when we were on holiday, and he was furious about that. Then someone was bullying someone, and he was not going to accept that.
He wouldn't have it.
So
But he wasn't a saint.
He wasn't, and that's the thing. He wasn't a saint. He had a mischievous and a naughty streak.
He's a real monkey at school and things.
And he always had this expression that you're a free man of the land, and that things should be for free. We should do it for love. We shouldn't have to pay for electricity. Everyone should have it for free. So he sort of, he had that sort of view. But I think for me, when he was younger, I had a very close relationship with him when he was tiny, and and then with being a young lad and then a man, then you come to the thing where a dad and sort of potentially you have to be a bit of a disciplinarian. So I suppose from my point of view, from him, when I see him in my head, it's the little young boy with his bubble lawnmower, and the bubble supply, and the fact that he, whereas as we got older, and then you had sort of schoolwork or college and things, then my relationship with Hector sort of got to that normal sort of stage where we had
butt heads
together and things. So with him, I go right back to very early age, I think, in terms of that.
Yeah, whereas I was very close to him right up until the end. I mean, I was just angry with him that he didn't tell me that there was something more wrong. But I could never really be angry with him.
But he had a comfortable way that you wanted to be in his company.
You want to be around him.
I mean, I can remember the last weekend, when he was sort of strumming in the garden, and I'm saying, just go gigging, heck, just go off, go do some busking or something, just, don't worry. And he didn't really take that on, and not coming from me, he wouldn't have taken that on anyway. But in many ways, I didn't really understand just how talented he is with the music until after we then learnt lots of things around. It's a difficult one because I learnt so much about Hector from his friends that I wouldn't have met otherwise. After he died, and they came and spoke to us, and still it happens. I met and you told us, that the family when we met you, and for us, we always say, when someone talks to us about the family and things, it's still so important, and it really means so meaningful.
That he hasn't been forgotten.
Yeah,
that
and the whole family,
still keep in touch. And
yeah,
it's just lovely, and it's bittersweet in a way, but quite a lot of Hector's friends now are growing up, getting married, having babies, and you could either look at it as like, oh, I don't want anything to do with it because it makes me really sad, or you look at it and you go, well, this is bittersweet, but this might have been how his life might have been.
Yeah.
So I do like to think about it like that.
And the fact that they're still in touch and they'll come and tell us, and sometimes they'll tell us
and
something
show us their babies
on a big occasion, and that is so meaningful. We love it. We love to hear.
It means so much.
We love to hear from people.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great.
I think definitely for me, like, I didn't know Hector that well, and I always try and make that clear if I talk to people who really were his friends, because I don't want to seem like I'm trying to implicate myself more deeply in anything than I actually was. But for me, when I think of Hector, he's like disentangleable from music. That's just what I think of him. It's like, as soon as I think of him, I think of seeing him. I think the first time I saw him play on stage, he was 14. I think he was really young, and I'm 2 years older than him, and I remember just being kind of knocked on my ass at how, like, I was like, how is this kid that confident, like, to get up and play in front of a room?
That was probably the gig at Penley.
I saw him there.
Yeah.
I saw him play a friend's. It was either a friend's birthday party or it was just another friend's band. It was their show and his band was supporting. I can't remember which one, but I saw him play a couple of times. So yeah.
Yeah. Right from that early age, so I've still got that footage actually of him, and he's wearing his little sort of Sherpa hat pulled down, and he's just playing and you're just coming out, it's just amazing. I think they were supporting Creel Commission, who were probably more your age group. Do you remember Creel Commission?
Vaguely, yeah. So, but yeah, like I said, I just thought it was incredible. That's how I picture him, as like on stage playing and singing, and it took me until I was 31 or 32 to actually like feel comfortable enough to front a band. It's a huge thing, and it's still like, not just because I'm talking to you, it's still, he's someone I think about sometimes when I'm like, just do the thing, like, because it's like, I remember seeing him as a kid and being so impressed, because I already played guitar and I wanted to be in a band, but I wasn't. And I was like, he's already doing it. It's like 2 years younger than me, which when you're only 15 or 16 is, he may as well have been 5. So it's like, yeah. So that was the thing I was always impressed by with him. So, which kind of
loved it.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and he had an interest in lots of music stuff, which was great. Moving on to the next kind of question I've written down is, how did you keep yourselves safe? And how did you go about finding support after Hector's death?
We were very lucky, weren't we? We had a few sessions of counselling, which was really, really helpful. At one point, I felt really at the end of my tether. And I make no bones about it, I do take sertraline to help me get through. Just a low dose, but it just keeps the edge off things, and I've never really seen any reason to change that, because it does work for me. You did for a while, but then you stopped, didn't you? But I think we were very lucky that we had all these people around us, really. My sister was amazing, wasn't she? She was such a, she supported us that whole year, really. She was with us a lot of the time. So we were lucky like that. Work were good because we lived on the premises, which was a really weird thing, but in a way it was good for me because it meant I went back to work after 2 weeks, and that was actually really good for me, because I worked in rescue for dogs, that was a really good thing to go back into. Hector had always been there, and he was very good with the dogs as well, so it was kind of a way of connecting with him. It felt like I could still be doing it, feeling how it was when we were together, we were doing stuff together. But that was kind of how I coped. I don't know about with you.
Yeah, I think so I went back to work a couple of weeks after, and it was really hard going into business meetings with people, listening to their normal lives, normal inverted commas. Actually, the energy required to go in to actually spend time with individuals talking about something else meant that, you know, I'd come out of meetings and would burst into tears because it was just, I found it just so hard. And I suppose there was this thing of people avoiding you, or people coming up and telling me their problems. And then I went on to various sort of online sites for people who'd lost children, but a lot of those were people who lost children through illness and things.
Yeah.
And I felt a fraud being on there, because when someone dies by suicide, they made the decision. Although people were quite kind and they said, no, it's valid that you're on here, it didn't quite work. And of course, back in the day when Hector took his life, I hadn't heard of SOBs or survivors of bereavement by suicide or anything like that. And I needed to find some hope, and I didn't know about those groups or organisations. Helpers at Hand wasn't there for us to understand. You know, there's now a booklet which is very, very helpful in helping you through that process. So actually, I read an article written by Claire Milford Haven, whose son had taken his life. So I wrote to her and said, if you'd like anyone to volunteer for your charity, can I do that? And she didn't. She wrote back and said, come and meet me. And then I met her with Jane Powell from Calm, and we chatted with Claire. We spoke to Jane from Calm, and then through that, what I needed to know was, is it possible to live a life going forward from this? And I met through. We then worked. We did some running for Calm, and we did some stuff for Calm, which gave me purpose. It got me out. And then with Claire, I joined the Alliance of Suicide Charities and met other parents. And so from that, I began my process of being able to move forward by then meeting other parents, understanding, discussing, hearing. And there's that thing that there's a connection that doesn't even need to be discussed, where you feel that they understand. And that gave me hope going forward. It did lead to then, you know, the development then of raising money and eventually Hector's House, because in that I then gained purpose back into my life, which then meant for everything else I could work through my working and day job. None of it's been easy really, because 18 months into, I then found that I was experiencing depression, because I'd been to the GP about something else. And so then I went on, like Belinda, had a bit of antidepressants for a while. And then eventually then working out, what do I need to do to live well? And what did I need to change? And it's the whole grief process is a great, big, long, looping.
It's that big
diamond,
old diamond with many, many facets. So you have to keep turning it, and each facet you have to address before you can move it on. If you imagine, yeah. That's how I always see it.
And it's not linear, so you go backwards and forwards. And and I would say that we're probably still going through it. But grief doesn't go away. The pain of losing Heck is never going to leave us, but we manage that, so it becomes more manageable. So I always talked about this big, huge weight on my shoulder, which I was very happy to carry, but it was physical, and then it becomes into the body, then it becomes sort of maybe more mental, and then over time it becomes more manageable. And I needed to find people who I could hang on their coattails to actually help me find hope and purpose and to keep on. And I think your work were very good with that, and say Auntie Susie, and then, you know, our family, you know, in terms of our immediate, you know,
my dogs,
siblings and the dogs.
I have to say they were very, very important.
And then all the things that we talk about now, which is, you know, is in how can you live well? But the main thing is connection. The main thing is, I think, is people understanding what it's like, how it feels, and, you know, what does it mean? And, you know, people say all sorts of strange things to you, like, oh, well, it's been long enough now, maybe it's time to,
get
move on, which is not an expression I
never use
the expression move on.
No.
Or,
you move forward, but you don't.
But other people can say all sorts of strange things, and they don't realise they're saying it, but but they do, and that's the thing. When someone's going through grief, not only by suicide, any grief, is that they need to be heard and listened to and sat with, and even if it's uncomfortable silence, just and knowing whatever they're feeling is absolutely fine too, because you go through times when you're really angry, or and with yourself or with other people or with the person who's died. It's a very complicated thing.
There's
well, you revisit, don't you, and go back to it and go, what if I'd done this, what if I'd done that, but eventually no, that didn't happen, and you have to accept that it didn't happen, and then you have to move forward.
There's a couple of things that you brought up in there that I just wanted to touch on before, because you kind of also led into the next thing I was going to ask as well, but I just wanted to go back to a couple of things, which was first off, I think it's really important that you both acknowledge that you have used, and Belinda, you're still taking prescribed antidepressants for stuff, because there's such a stigma about people going and getting medical help. And I think, again, it's not necessarily the best solution for everyone, but then there is no one size fits all solution. So I think it's very important that you've acknowledged that, and that, Rob, the fact that you took them because you needed them at the time, and it's become something that now you don't need to lean on because for whatever reason you're just not in that same place within your own mental kind of health and mental fitness. But I think it's really important that you touched on that you did go and get that type of help, as in medical help. Because like I said before, so many people are scared of either seeking it out or scared of acknowledging that that's something they've used. So I just wanted to touch on that and say it's really important that you mentioned that. Thank you for bringing that up. The other thing was that with some of the things you were talking about, I hadn't really thought about it until you said that you sent a letter. And I mean, how much has the landscape changed now with social media and all that kind of stuff compared to then? Because now, if this was the same position, I mean, what would you send an email, presumably, right? But it might even be that you send a message on Facebook or Instagram, or you might tweet someone, or whatever the phrase is for X now. But, how different do you think the landscape is now compared to then, and how much more accessible do you think things are now than then?
Yeah, but it's completely different. So I think Heck had an iPhone.
Yeah, he had an iPhone, and he had a website and had various things, but it was very much in its not infancy, but not great.
No,
in those days.
But I'm not sure. But whether because we're going back to what did Heck have? Because I can't remember when I got my first iPhone or whether I had a BlackBerry at that time. But what was on there? So Facebook, I think, was a thing.
Yeah.
I don't think Instagram was a thing.
Hadn't been invented. Twitter wasn't invented.
Well, no, Twitter might, but we might not have known about it because I think it was something we didn't do. LinkedIn and things. But so in terms of the landscape of how you would contact someone, yes, potentially now everyone would have a website and you would send an email, and that leads to the fact, I suppose, is what we always say about social media and all of that. It means that you can and websites and
Maz put a statement out on their what was it, their band.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he did put a statement out which then radiated everybody to come into us, physically to come to us, which
but I think in terms of,
but there wasn't that much really.
No, so in terms of, I think, being able to find out, help, contact people, the whole thing was, the whole landscape was different then in terms of social media, which is then leads us to then what are the challenges of social media now in terms of reaching out, connecting, what you can see, how you manage that. But back then, no. So it was less easy.
A few things on Google, weren't there? But there wasn't really very much.
I think things have developed in that last 11, 12 years massively in terms of, if you think of the work we do at Hector's House, much of that is then putting on social media so people can have raised of awareness and raising awareness, and then how do you get support through signposting? I don't think any of that sort of stuff was done then. So you wouldn't. you maybe go onto a website and find a document, but I don't think it wasn't used like it is now, where it's very useful, but also it's a challenge for people where they can see too much, or as we know with all Instagram and everything else, just the validations through that. But yeah, we're talking, I think all of that's developed since Hector died.
You didn't have influencers.
And you didn't have influencers and
malarkey,
no,
did you?
and that, you know, and how you would obtain information or whatever. So as you say, I wrote a letter to contact someone as opposed to sending an email or tweeting them.
Yeah.
Which is only 11, 12 years ago. So it is weird.
Yeah, it's very strange to think that even then that was the sort of your first point of contact, was to be like, oh, I better go and get a pen and paper, otherwise I'm never going to get hold of this person. It's it's very strange to think that's how kind of like so recently how much that's changed now. Because the next question I had on my list was, but you'd already started leaning into that anyway, was I was going to ask, how did you find help and support that was specifically tailored to bereavement of suicide compared to other forms of bereavement?
There wasn't a lot.
No, there was none. So
there's not a lot.
No.
I hope really that what Robert's done, because Robert obviously does a lot more than I do. I just support other people here and there. But I do hope that, and I do feel that Robert has been very instrumental in causing those things to happen, to being the cause of people having that support of these things. There was a leaflet that the police were given that we were never given that one when Hector first died. There was like a book that was supposed to be available, but it wasn't available in every police
It wasn't
station.
written then.
So all of those things were not there. There wasn't that support. Whereas once you kind of got the bit between your teeth, I know it's been you and a lot of other people.
It wasn't me, to be honest, but
you have. He has really lived it the whole time. He will do anything he can do to create things to happen so that you have that help and support, because we had nothing.
No.
I mean, the first support I had was when the vicar came round, you know, and he was the only person who was lovely and actually came and chatted to me.
Yeah, he was unbelievable.
It just wasn't the support there. It was this huge taboo about not talking about it, about, you know, oh, somebody I know's died of suicide, oh dear, how terrible, you know. So it was opening all that up, you know, cracking it open and saying, look, this is what's happened. We're admitting it. Let's do it. And that's, you know, what Robert's done.
Well, no, and so
blowing his trumpet for him.
Because the truth is, locally, I have done a few things locally, and I do support locally. Things like Helpers at Hand, and you know, so Helpers at Hand was something that was developed by other people. I had some input into it, but it was done by other people within the Alliance of Suicide Charities. So probably about 3 or 4 years after Hecky, there's Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, SOBS. Now, I think it might have existed then, but we wouldn't have known about it. And because, you know, what you're referring to, Dec, is how, you know, nowadays this sort of stuff, you'd be able to find it much easier. And then talking to suicide prevention strategies, which again, I think the first one is 2011, then it was done again 5 years later, was saying that, and it's only now beginning to happen, that there are liaison people in some counties, not all. Now, I've fed into that. I haven't actually. It's not me that's made it happen. You know, when I was first ran for Calm back in 2011, Calm was a tiny charity that hardly anyone had heard of. Now it's national.
Huge,
and it's all over the paper, all over the news, all adverts. It's unbelievable. So when that's the difficulty we look through the lens now, is that, you know, what people need is when there's a sudden potential suicide, or whether it's a sudden death or something that could be suicide, is that the care needs to be handled. Those people need to be handled with care. They don't always need the help at the time. It's a matter of knowing that the help is there and available, and the resources are there and available, because you've got police there, you've got the coroners that you're involved in, you've got all sorts of things happening which are really, really unbelievably
quite frightening because as a family you didn't expect to be doing that.
No.
Standing up in coroner's court and giving evidence and doing all that sort of thing. It's not what happens in your everyday.
No, and so all of those things, which is what things that Help is at Hand, and what everybody that has fed into all of this, people like us, have fed into these groups to say this is what it feels like, and then how you support someone who's gone through it. It can, like in many things, like we see this in many walks of life, people who have had, other breast cancers or whatever, then prostate cancer, they go on to be advocates, they go on to try and move things and change things based on their experience. And if you've suffered from that or experienced that, the peers that have experienced it can be the best people to help you and to listen to you. And that's where we sit in terms of this. And knowing that things have moved on well, and of which I have fed into, and I have heard of it, been involved in various things that have done all with this. There are both parents and people, and NHS people and doctors and Samaritans and things who are way above my pay grade and level in this, who have done so much, and other parents that I know. I've mentioned one, someone like Claire Milford Haven, David and Hamish, and various people that I just admire so much, who've really pushed things in universities and in strategies and with the government as well. And it's a whole bunch of people that have done and are still doing amazing work out there, raising awareness and affecting change. And that's what we do. So it isn't. I've paid a very small part in it, potentially a little bit bigger with people that come to us. That's fine, I admit that, but not out there. No, it's bigger people than me. I have fed into it occasionally.
He doesn't blow his own trumpet.
No, but it is different. It is different now, and there is more there. So what we want is that you have real-time data collection by many police forces now. We want helpers at hand given out to people. We've got different liaison officers working in different counties. In Beds, we've got a group called Chums that are amazing, who do that. In Bucks now, there's Amparo. So you've got to have. What we basically want is that when something happens, the team goes in and actually then helps look after you. And this is, that was led by what Claire Milford Haven said to us. If I'd known, I'd have driven to see you.
I'd have driven all night to see you.
I'd have driven all night to see you, is what she said. That lady and everyone else that we met is that, that sort of person gives you hope in the future, and that people will do that and say that they'll do that. And
then that you go on and do it for other people.
Yeah.
Because that's how it works. That's how the circle, if you like, works.
I agree, yeah. It's a very easy throwaway statement, and it's a very fashionable sort of statement to be like, oh, people are the worst. But they're not. Generally speaking, people are pretty great. It's like, regardless of, people's political beliefs or faiths or lack of their everything else, if you walk down the street and you see a car that's crashed, you'll probably run over and see if you can help. And I think that's the same for 99.9% of people. If there is a solution to a problem in front of them and they can help, they will. Sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect between people and the problems they could be solving. But I think that's because we all like to assume everyone would be doing everything they can all the time. But people have their own lives to lead as well. I think, people are inherently capable of doing really, really wonderful things. And sometimes as well, people would love to help, but they don't know where to go to or how to help. And that's another thing to bear in mind. Again, the next thing I was going to ask, you were kind of touching on there, and you sort of drifted into it a little bit, but what I was going to ask specifically was what do you wish you knew at the time that you know now? So not so much necessarily something about Hector as a person, but just in general, like what do you wish you could tell yourself 10 years ago that you know today?
I wish I had known how to listen.
I knew you'd say that.
I still need to remind myself how to listen now. It goes on forward. So not just because Hector died and how he died, and where I have things that I wish that I had listened more to understand, and potentially might have been able to help more with Hecky. But even now, in my continuing real life now, is to then listen more, not try and fix not to worry about everything and try and solve everyone's problems, because sometimes by trying to solve someone's problems, I actually cause more problems rather than just listening and saying, okay, what do you need? Okay, that's what you need. That's fine. If you told me otherwise, I'd just leave things alone. But to listen, and I think to just have faith in the end that everything is going to be okay and will work out. I do a lot of, and I spend a lot of time telling people not to do this, but I do a lot of thinking, a lot of worrying about things and worrying around things, and I work on it constantly. I put a post out yesterday about a stone that we have up here, standing stone, and I do need to go and give it a hug, and I do need to just stand there and listen to and smell the nature, and to walk the dogs and go for a swim, because a lot of the time my brain is thinking things through and thinking to the future, and I try not to, but obviously ruminating about the past. So I wish that I had, and I wish that I still listen more and worry less.
You're all looking at me now.
Yeah, you are.
I mean, yeah, is there anything that you wish you kind of, like I said, anything that you wish you knew then?
I think one of the things Robert has said actually is to actually not try and put it right, to actually listen sufficiently to understand what's actually wrong in the first place. And that's hard. As a parent, you always just want to go, oh, but it'll be all right because we'll do so and so, it'll be fine, we'll do this, we'll do that, and it isn't always the answer. So yeah, if I was to go back, I think I would be very much more of a listener, and I think that would, it's very similar to what Robert said, really, the fact that we all need to listen, because quite often we're so keen to get our point across. We all do it, we all interrupt each other, and so we're so busy listening to ourselves and we're not actually hearing what the other person is saying. So listening is a massively important skill, and it's something I think we both learned.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I mean, specifically in Hector's point, if I'd understood the pain he was in, if I'd listened more to what's going on, and then to try and help him through that, if I'd even noticed or understood. And that's the thing, is it's that taking. So yeah, then I wish I had known that. I wish I'd known more now, and I continue to know more about listening, and then sitting with, and and giving time. I think, and as I said, and also with ourselves as well, because that's the problem. So I'm always reminded about the song from Into the Woods about children will listen.
Children will listen.
And yeah, that for various reasons you think, okay, yeah. So I think it's about listening and understanding when you say something, how it could be perceived, and so how people will listen to your words. So yeah, it's all about the 2 ears, 1 mouth thing, and I wish that, I continue to wish that I could do that.
I think something I see a lot of, and I've always seen it, and I notice it more now because of working with you guys and seeing more about the way that people's mental health is affected by their sort of environment and their surroundings, and all that, everything that goes on around them, basically. I think there's a huge tendency to downplay the problems of anyone younger than you, even if they're only like a touch younger than you. There's a real thing to sort of be like, well, this person doesn't know what problems are yet. And I think especially with younger people, when you're looking at teenagers or younger adults, there's a thing that people do where they sort of wave away a younger person's problems, which I think is slowly changing. But I think that kind of ties into what you were saying, is you wish you could have listened to Hector a bit more. And I think part of that is just, it's difficult when you're looking at someone who's so much younger than you, because there's this idea in your head if they don't have enough experience yet to understand the severity of, problems. And it's just not the case. Whatever people are going through, they're going through it, and their internal scale of 0 to 10, it's only a scale of 0 to 10. It's not, by the time someone's 25, that scale doesn't go up to 12. By the time they're 40, it doesn't go up to 15. It's a 0 to 10 scale. And I think that's a big thing for people to try and be more empathetic of in general is that when you're talking to someone and they're talking about whatever the problems are they're facing, you have to bear in mind how important those problems are to that person and not write them off because it's not your experience. So I think that's quite a common thing for people to do. I certainly see it a lot, and you see it a lot in the news as well, the way that things are presented. Whether it was what we've just seen with the last round of GCSE results, there are so many people that are like, oh, why are these kids so upset? And so, well, because they've spent 16 years working towards that thing, and now it's not been what they've expected. You have to bear in mind that's 100% of their life. They've worked towards something that to you, you're like, but it was only that much of my life. And so, well, yeah, because you've gone that far past it. So I think it's a very important thing. So what I wanted to ask as well was, is there's one thing that you would share to somebody who's been bereaved by a suicide, what is the one thing that you wish you could kind of get across to them?
It's an interesting one.
Yeah, my point is that whatever you're feeling is absolutely right. However, with time, and it is time, and it has to be in your time, no one else's time, it is possible to get through this, to live a life again, to be able to manage it, and to be able to move forward. So it is, but what I hear so often is people shortening that time for them. So it's a little bit like you just said about the GCSEs. How that young person is feeling about that is totally valid. It's the same way if you've been bereaved by suicide and you've got 2 other children as well, and people say, well, you need to worry about your 2 other children. Yes, of course, I do worry about my 2 other children. But at the time when Hector died, that pain was so big, I have to manage that first. And it's understanding that everything you feel is really valid, absolutely valid, and how your feet going through it is valid. But I promise you, but it does take a bit of self-compassion, that with time, your time, it becomes more manageable, and you will find hope and joy, and you will laugh again one day. And in that, it means that you don't forget the person. They live with you. And everyone says, oh, they're in your heart, so that's absolutely fine. It doesn't at the beginning. No, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. But in the end, it is a cliche thing, but in the end, it does begin to be able to be something that is.
It becomes manageable.
And so, that pain is still with you. That pain is there, but it's manageable. And that pain is them. That is that love. That's what the Queen said, isn't it? The price of love is pain, is grief. And so we still carry that. And so, and that's there, but it's manageable. So it's for them to know it is possible and you can. And at the moment, you might not be feeling that you can. And it's absolutely SH1T. And that's fine too, because it is. But you'll get there. And our message at Hector's House and Belinda and my message with all of this is that there is always hope. With support, there is always hope. And that's why we do what we do, is to say there's hope. Because as we said right at the beginning, Belinda said, this will not define us. So therefore, we will, and if we can give somebody a glimmer, tiny 1% glimmer of hope, that they can go, okay, I can get through this next moment because they've managed to do that. Then if that's all we do, then I'm really happy.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
My message is just be kind to yourself. That's literally my whole message, to be honest. Be good to yourself. Don't beat yourself up all the time, because people do. You beat yourself up a lot. And you're good really, but you do beat yourself up a lot. You have to be kind to yourself, because anything that happens starts with you. And if you had this bad experience of suicide or whatever, you've still got to be kind to yourself. You've got to give yourself time to heal, time to be outside, especially to be out in the fresh air. You know, there are a lot of things that we put on to the side, don't we, about fresh air, eating properly, all of those things, and they are all important, but they are self-care. And, you know, once you're kind of on that route, it's really, really much more helpful for people, because you don't want to destroy yourself too, which could so easily happen. You know?
I think it's also understanding, so you have to come to a bit of an understanding, because of the way that grief works, that there's a lot of blame and self-blame as well in this situation, and understanding that, and to get up to that level where you can begin to work on the stuff we talk about, eat, move, love, which is where occasionally and with great care with your GP, you might need a little bit of help with, say, looking at potential antidepressants. But going forward, it's a matter about saying, well, you know, that person who died by suicide was in such pain that to them it was a logical decision. They didn't want to do it because they were selfish. They felt, sometimes we hear that you'll be better off without me being there, being a burden. And what happens is that person, in a way, puts their pain onto us, so it's transferred. You talked before about a permanent solution to a temporary problem, which then becomes our permanent solution. And that's where how you're feeling is absolutely valid, because that permanent problem, which was a temporary problem, is now your personal pain to deal with going forward, which is where Belinda's self-compassion comes in, because you didn't deserve this to happen to you either, and so therefore you have to go through all those questions, and the diamond that Belinda talks about, we all have to go through those questions. But you didn't deserve this to happen, and it's really hard, but with time, your time, you will be able to manage it, and there is hope, and then you can live a life. And then from what we do is that we honor Hector by doing that and saying he would hate us to spend the rest of our lives being miserable, not actually going out, not doing things, not laughing, not seeing the dogs or whatever. Imagine it when I meet him again and he said, well, why did you, I made that decision, and then you've wasted 40 odd years of time.
Yeah.
And that's what we work on, is that whatever, I will kick his ass when I see him, but at the end of the day, I can say, well, we've carried on, and we do that, because otherwise it means that you've ruined your life and our lives as well, which is something I think he would hate that. That's not what he was about, which we said earlier. He was not about that. Person. So that's the thing. So you gave us permission to be able to move forward, and we use him to give us permission to go out there and do things. I think because we don't deserve not to do that.
I think that's a very, very eloquent way of phrasing it. And I think as well, when you're saying, if by you guys doing what you do, not just as in with this organization, but just in general, by being around and by, like, I know you both, I know obviously Rob, I've talked to you a lot more, but I know you both as people, and you're very warm, very, very kind of like loose people is how I describe it, but you're very warm to be around, and there's like a sort of silliness to both of you, which is something that, again, when I think of Hector, that's a big factor, and I can see where that comes from. And I think, it's very important. But you were saying, if you can provide 1% of hope to someone out there to keep going, I mean, we know that you've done that several times, and by much more than 1% in some cases, by maybe just 1% in other cases. But there's a lot of people out there who either are still around because of work that has been done because of you guys, or who have been able to start moving forward and processing things and putting their lives back together because of you guys. So, and sometimes because of very specifically you two, not because of the work that we're doing, or as in Hector's house is doing on your behalf, but sometimes it's because of a conversation that one or both of you has had with a person, and that's been enough to show them that there is still a reason to kind of carry on and to be around, that yeah, they'll have days where they get up and they can laugh about things and they can still enjoy their life. So I think that's very important. Before we kind of wrap things up, is there just a particular memory or story about Hector that either of you want to share? Just sort of like the first thing that comes to mind as an example of like who he is, who he was.
Oh God, there's so many.
Yeah.
Let me think. Yeah, actually a really sad one, actually, a bit sad really. Hector used to go to the local riding school, and I always remember him coming home absolutely distraught because he used to go up there and work on a Saturday. And he said, Mum, it's been awful today. So I said, what happened? So he said, well, there was a lady and she'd been learning to ride, and all her family came to watch her today, and she fell off her horse and she hurt herself really badly. And he said, and he was quite really tearful about it. And this was a kid of like 12, 13, you know, but he had that empathy. It was just so, it wasn't, oh God, that woman fell off her horse, ha ha. It was real, but all her family were there to see her mum, and it was so sad. And he was always like that. He had this real empathy, even from a kid, from a tiny child. He was like an old person. He had this wisdom about him, you know. But he was as mad as a hatter otherwise. I mean, he was always doing mad things, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, and then
garden hurdling and all sorts of things.
There's so many stories of when he has been upset on behalf of other people. So, oh, be nice to them because they don't know. I mean, you know, it's things like, it wasn't that long before he died. Was that he was showing someone how to backflip off a bin, and didn't realise that in actual fact that it went down 10 feet the other side of the bin. I think it was someone in Miswell Lane, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, something like that.
And so that's the sort of thing he would do. So he would do backflips and things and not look actually what he was going to backflip off and what happened, and he broke his leg. So that's sort of, and you go, what? Why didn't you? And that's, you know, why didn't you think about that? And then
he'd just laugh.
And then he was in the cast for a while with his. He used to wear big, like lounge pants that we'd wear, and you know, which I wouldn't be seen out of the house.
He used to wear pajamas actually.
He used to wear pajamas, and he would then he would turn them up and then wear Crocs and go down and actually go into town in those and not care. And you go, hey, do you really? Is it? And yeah, and in actual fact, he was fine. He looked cool, and he would do that. And you know, Crocs are in now, and people go out in lounge pants, and they'd be fine. You know, and that, I'm not just saying that because he's not here, but he was a bit like that.
Yeah.
But
also, his own man.
But also a little bit risky in that, yeah, he that backflip off the bin, and you think,
free man of the land.
Heck, there you go. And so, yeah, that's the sort of thing. And I'd go, and I would do the angry dad stuff. And now, I mean, I go, you know, it's just I'd love to have had the guts to do that sort of thing, really. Yeah.
I missed the laughs so much after we lost him. I missed the laughs because we used to just have this banter going all the time, and to have that suddenly go was a real shock. You know, I missed that so much. That was one of the biggest things, you know, that we had this silly relationship, and I just missed that.
But they, you know, he was in some ways amazing and angelic. In some ways he could be very naughty. So yeah, as we said earlier, he could be both.
Yeah, I think that's like, I don't want to put too much on the end of that, because I want to leave that on your thoughts and your memories of him, because they're so much more valuable than mine are. But that's how I remember him, as someone who was very, very silly, very fun, had a lot of energy and a lot of confidence. But also he could do a lot of stuff. He was a very tactile person. I know a couple of people like that, like Captain Everything's. Like, it takes them half as good to get half as long to get twice as good at you as the thing that you're doing. And it's like, yeah, they kind of can just turn their hand to so many different things. But yeah, I think that's definitely how I remember him as well.
He did that in college, because actually, again, all these stories come out. His college lecturer said to us, he was trying to teach some people to do this thing, this tune.
A song.
It was a song.
Sung in part.
And Hector
they sang it at his funeral.
They did, actually.
Yeah.
Hector, being Hector, wasn't in the class he should have been, so he walked past, went in, and then played it, and he sang it word perfect. He said, well, and that's the sort of thing he'd do. But he was actually not at his class doing what he should have done, because he wouldn't have done it.
It's probably theory, music theory, and business.
Yeah, but as you say, and you know, he had a TX motorbike that he could ride. He could skateboard. He could, if he got it, he'd just do it.
Yeah.
Really weird.
He just used to jump all things on his bike, didn't he? Like miles down. Frightened to death.
Oh, and all the other memories of all the Vespers outside the house, so that all his mates would come and you couldn't get on the drive because all their Vespers
there were bikes everywhere.
And bikes, and I'm being angry dad, so I can't get it. I should be able to come home and the place is covered in Vespers, and I would love now that the place was covered in Vespers. And also one day I came home and the whole drum kit and everything else was on the flat roof, and they were having a gig on the flat roof.
On the roof.
In the residential area. That sort of stuff. It's that sort of stuff.
So funny.
Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah. That's definitely
happy days.
That's the person that I remember 100%. And I think that's like, again, it's like I said it earlier, it's there's an inspirational element to that in terms of being able to just like, don't worry about the thing, just do the thing. And I know I'm lucky enough to know a few people like that, and he was definitely someone who was like that as well. And I kind of carry that, or try and carry that with me. I try not to overthink things. Sometimes I'm like, just start it now, because by the time I worry about it and then start, I could already be learning, even if it's by making mistakes. If I just like start something now and just start trying to learn and do and whatever it is. So I just wanted to say thank you both so much for your time today. I know Belinda.
You're welcome.
I know you're not the most technologically competent person, so thank you so much for sitting down with us. I've heard wonderful stories of you when it's like, you have a place to be and a time to be there, but actually you found a really good chapter in a book, so you've wandered off somewhere to do that instead. So thank you for being here and for sitting down and spending some time talking to us. It's been wonderful to spend some time with you and hear some of your stories and thoughts and feelings and opinions and everything. And Rod, obviously we talk all the time just because of work, but thank you so much for sitting down and talking about this, and to both of you for being so honest about everything in this conversation that we've had as well. Before we hit the leave button on the Zoom meeting and depart, I just wanted to say, as well as saying thank you to you guys and to anyone who's sat down and watched this and listened to this and can see this as an example of how to begin moving forward once you've gone through that kind of bereavement. If you do want to get in touch with us at Hector's House, our email address is hihector@hectorshouse.org.uk. You can email us there. The email inbox is open 24/7. We can't always respond immediately. We try and respond to everything within 24 hours. If it's because you just want to ask more information about us, get in touch. If you want to look at volunteering, get in touch. If you want help for your own well-being, get in touch. If you want help approaching someone else for how to support them, get in touch. If it's suicide support, if it's bereavement support, if it's basically anything that you think we can help with, please just get in touch with us. Like I said, it's hihector@hectorshouse.org.uk, and everything we do is just to help as many people as we can. And sometimes that little 1% thing is really what makes a giant difference. So yeah, thank you so much for everything that you guys do. Yeah, you're bloody wonderful. I'm glad to see you both smiling and laughing and living a life where you're doing well and you're happy. So it's a beautiful thing to see. And it was nice to see Hector looking over your shoulder the entire way through this as well. So yeah.
Thanks, Dec, and thanks for everything.
Thank you, Dec.
Thanks for everything you do. You brighten our days and our lives by being here with us. Thank you.
No problem. Right. Take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and everyone watching the same thing as well. All we have is each other. So thank you so much. Goodbye.